Let's get this party started, as they say. So we're going to be here to entertain you for an hour and 20 minutes. Yes, that is a very, very long time. Thank you, Greg, yet again for this. Greg Freeman had this idea after he saw a similar presentation in Canada. So if it doesn't work, can you blame him, please? The whole idea, we hope, is to give you a different perspective, an industry perspective of what a working environment is like. I don't know about you guys, but it feels like this year everyone just kind of needs a big group hug because it's been a really difficult year for everyone. Garth actually said that at a dinner last year, look after each other, and we all kind of went, he's a bit cray-cray, but I think he's right. You know, it just feels like it's been such a difficult year for everyone. So hopefully we'll start to understand each other a bit differently, a bit better, and I hope you do find the session of value. I'm Gail Sloan. I'm the CEO of Waste Management and Resource Recovery Company organisation, and that's pronounced WAMR, so tonight the pirate theme is probably appropriate for us. Joining us on the panel today, we've got Garth Lamb, Dave Clancy, Christine Hodgkins, Tony Gerbischoff, and, oh, I said that wrong already, Gerbenshikoff, sorry, Tony, and Daniel Tartak. I'm just going to give you a little bit about who they are. They're going to give you a 1-minute elevator's pitch of what their company is. Then when we know the panel, we're going to have a bit of a conversation about the industry, and then we're going to do a bit of a Q&A about what's going on around the place. So hopefully you'll find it of use. First, so I'm going to start with Garth. Garth's the Chief Development Officer for Regroup, an Australian company focused on providing high-quality solutions for recycling and recovery of resources from waste. Garth has worked in the Australian waste and resource recovery industry for more than a decade, and prior to Regroup, he was with Hyder. Tell us about Regroup, Garth.
I think I summed it up pretty well in that bio that I wrote for you, Gail. But so Regroup's an Australian company. We focus on resource recovery, so we are across yellow bin MRFs, green bin composting. I guess the history of the team was in the red bin mixed waste processing. We're developing an energy from waste facility in New South Wales at Mount Piper in conjunction with Energy Australia. We're not involved in the transport side. There's a lot of people who are very, very good at that. We specialise in the processing end. We don't do landfills, we don't do trucks, but all the processing side is where we see ourselves, and also playing a major role, I guess, in the container deposit and container refund schemes at the moment.
Cool. Next to Garth, we've got David Clancy. David's been with Cleanaway for 29 years in the industry. It's changed names over that time, though. He's currently the state general manager for Cleanaway, and he's also a director on Tomra at Cleanaway. Dave, tell us about Cleanaway.
So Cleanaway is one of the oldest waste companies in Australia, and it's founded in '74. So it's got a long history in the state and also in the country. Nationally, we've run about 6,000 trucks, or 6,000 people, 4,000 trucks, about 250 sites around the country. 119 of those are licensed resource recovery facilities. In terms of the journey we've been on, I think going back, say, 5 years in this room, we were all talking about a truck, moving away from a truck and dump type of environment and an industry. And I think that's where all my partners up here and Cleanaway as well have progressed towards a resource recovery model. So very much looking at the waste hierarchy and working our way up to the top of that. So in terms of waste avoidance, waste reuse or reuse of materials, so a very developed education team across New South Wales who work with customers to reduce the amount of waste which they generate, talking to them about packaging and how they can present it through to the industry. And then moving down the chain, we've got, we as a company process about 2,500 tonnes of recyclables every day across the sector, excluding C&D, so that's commercial tonnes. And Garth mentioned CDS. We're picking up 5 million containers a day across New South Wales and the CDS, so really working through recovery of resources and maximising that through the chain. Cleanaway also operates end-of-life facilities and also the landfill space, so part of our journey and part of our responsibility for the industry is providing well-engineered, well-managed and environmentally responsible landfill and end-of-use locations as well.
Thanks, Dave. Next to David, we have Christine Hodgkins, who's the General Manager of Resource Recovery for Veolia New South Wales. Christine's responsible for the operation of Veolia's network of waste infrastructure across New South Wales, including Woodlawn Eco Precinct, and she has 20 years waste experience. Tell us a bit about Veolia, Christine.
Thanks, Gail. So I thought I might take the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Veolia from a broader context, and I think Rosalina's presentation this morning fits in really well with that, because we are a French multinational company, and the business that we operate in over there is within that context of the circular economy that is being driven by that European Union. So that's really a focus where we're heading into the future. Aside from the waste activities that we have in New South Wales in particular, which probably most of you are familiar with, we also are very strong in the water and the energy space. So some of the work that we're trying to do is see what synergies we've got between those parts of our business. So using the technical expertise that we have from a water perspective, and see how we can bring that to provide innovative solutions and new technologies in the waste area, and also similarly from an energy point of view. So for example, we just recently developed a solar farm that's actually supporting our activities down at Woodlawn. So I guess we're trying to think a little bit outside the box, see how we can grow our organisation and our business, and really make that change into greater resource recovery, moving up the waste hierarchy.
Thanks, Christine. Next to Christine, we've got Daniel Tartak. He's CEO of Bingo since July 2015, and he's been with Bingo his entire career. But when you're 33, that's not that long, Daniel, anyway. But he's worked and understands every aspect of the business. We need to fix that bio. Daniel, tell us a bit about Bingo.
Thanks, Gal. 15 years. I guess that's been a long time for me. Bingo Industries is a publicly listed company. We listed about 2 years ago. We're in New South Wales and Victoria across the building and demolition and commercial industrial supply chain. Recently, we undertook a merger with Dial Dump Industries, which I guess became, for us, we became an integrated company, especially in New South Wales, across collections, recycling and landfill. We have about 350 trucks across 2 states, a bit over 1,000 people, 20 resource recovery facilities, 16 of those in New South Wales, 4 in Victoria, and 2 landfills. Right now we're building 2 ecology parks, both in Western Sydney, one at Eastern Creek and one at Payton's Lane in Orchard Hills. Our vision at the moment is creating or pushing for a waste-free Australia, truly trying to create a circular economy. One thing we really focus on is the separation, diversion and recycling of mixed waste. So we take mixed waste across C&I and B&D, mostly non-putrescible, and we separate that, turn that into a product and sell it back to the market.
Thanks, Dan. And finally, we've got Tony Grebenshikov. Sorry, Tony G from now on. He's a new State General Manager of Suez in Australia and New Zealand. He's responsible for significant waste collection, resource recovery operations. Tony doesn't have a background in waste, so this is all very new to him. So tell us a bit about Suez, Tony.
So I was reminded that coming to this event, this will be like a family reunion. So far it is. This is day 75 for me in waste. So it's a fascinating industry. I've spent most of my time in defence, in aerospace, in security and transport markets. Working for a large French mob is who I worked for before, Thales, but now I've joined Suez. Suez is larger than Thales. If you don't know, Suez is headquartered opposite Thales in La Défense in France. Over 90,000 employees worldwide, but in Australia it's about 2,500 employees, 100 facilities, 2,000 trucks, and a lot of passionate people. I suppose what's Suez asking me to join them for, and what is Suez trying to do? Today's a significant day for Suez as well. Globally, Bertrand Campos is joined as the new CEO, and he's launching his Project 2030, which is a big ambitious project to drive the way we do waste management and the way we utilise resources. So our focus for Suez Australia and New Zealand is to align with that global strategy, and that's number one, is to redefine the way we do collection services. And that starts with the way we buy trucks, what the trucks are in, how we connect with the mums and dads, all the way to the local councils, and how we dispose of that product. Secondly, Suez does a lot of treatment and processing, and that's another big step, is there's a lot of value that goes past and you don't get to squeeze it out at the right time. There's some companies who do it really well in Australia, there's some companies globally who do it, and we're trying to find how the right mix of people, technology and process can squeeze that value out before it ends up in the last 2 places, which is either mean landfill, or burn it, which is we talked about the energy from waste. They are big infrastructure investments. If we're going to do it, Suez has a large footprint, but we are trying to find the best ideas and how my counterparts here can collaborate to influence that Australian strategy, which is obviously not quite clear for me yet.
Oh, come on, it's been 75 days. There's a rule in waste. If you make it past 6 months, you never leave. So be careful of that date. Put it in your diary.
Well, hopefully you'll all help me to get there, right?
So that's a bit about our panel. I guess hopefully we're giving you a really great cross-section of people who are in trucks, who are not in trucks, who do resource recovery. You know, Gar's got energy for waste, so is Veolia, Suez is looking at it. So, you know, we've got a really great remit, which is hopefully something a little bit different. We've got Bingo that currently don't do direct collection services at this stage, but obviously working with councils is integral to the success of their business, and also with the EPA. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview about the New South Wales industry for context, and then we're going to do Q&A. Now, we're not going to stand and talk, or I'm not, for the whole lot. You guys get to ask questions too. So, you know, after a bit of a Q&A between myself and the panel, I'm going to open up to the floor. So think of your questions for the panel, please. So who are we? You know, I hate that word waste. I just hate it. We're resource managers. If I can get my way before I finish in this job, we will actually just refer to ourselves as resource managers going forward. We're a $15.5 billion industry throughout Australia. We employ over 50,000 people. We represent almost 0.5% of Australian GDP. In New South Wales, it's a $5.3 billion industry. I think I saw Molly's slide this morning, which had great data. Like, my God, you've got different data to me, Molly, because I'm still working on the 2014-15 data. But it said that we would save $9 billion if we went circular. Like, these are massive sums in our industry, and I think we all feel for many years we've just been in the dark. And, you know, no one liked trashed. I won't talk about that today. We kind of like war and waste, but we have so come out of the dark, but we are so integral to society, and we haven't had our place. We are absolutely an essential industry. In Australia, we're at 67 million tonnes. There's a nice breakdown by sector. You know, we tend to think of MSW as being the main thing. It's about 13 million tonnes, probably about 25% of the stream. There's a massive stream out there in C&D and C&Is, and these guys are across all of that. And it's so key to what we do. We're one of the highest generators per capita. So all this data comes from the National Waste Report 2018 and the CIE report, and also the Inside Waste report that Richard did. Good plug this morning, Richard. So we're one of the highest generators per capita in Australia, in the world, in Australia, which is really frightening, and probably one of the lower diverters. I think we're about 20th in the recycling scale. In New South Wales, just a bit more about the 55. The strange thing about the National Waste Report, if you're a bit of a data freak like I am, this year they developed this concept of core waste. Didn't know that existed, but now that means everything by fly ash for those of us who haven't quite got to that report yet. 55 million tonnes of that. Again, household, 13 million tonnes of that. Where's our policy settings this morning? Molly, I don't know if you're still here, but could you just please pick up that EU strategy focusing on those 5 things and just get on with it? Like, it's just frightening that we're still talking about it. I watch that stuff, what the EU is doing, and just think, why do the federal government not just get on with it? They have 54 legislative pieces that they're acting on at present, and we still can't get a federal government that works out what it's doing when it comes to us. Anyway, at this stage, we're supposed to be diverting around about 70% across all bins. Again, Molly, the most I can find New South Wales diverting at is 62% or 60%, depending on where you are. You know, business as usual is not acceptable, and these are resources we're dealing with, people. These are our current policy settings in New South Wales. They haven't been looked at, I think, since 2012-13. The world has moved on a lot. Yeah, we started an infrastructure strategy in New South Wales, and then we kind of stopped. But we're getting back to it, people. Okay. How's New South Wales going? Across the board, around about 48 to 60% diversion across streams. C&I is really difficult to divert. I'm sure Dave's probably going to talk a bit more about that. But we do not focus enough on avoidance. We keep bringing things into society that we cannot manage. Like, how does that happen? I love the conversation this morning about built-in durability. You know, we should not have products that have got PFAS and PFOS still coming on the market, people. How does that happen? We don't know it's coming in the gate, but we're not having a conversation that it's even going on the shelf. I didn't know it was in microwave popcorn. I've stopped my children drinking it. Them and Nespresso pods are now banned from my house. On the right-hand side, for the first time, we've actually got a flow diagram, because now we actually think about what happens to waste. You know, this is the first year that diagram has been the National Waste Report. As an industry, we knew that people, to divert it, it's not enough putting it across a weighbridge into a MRF. It's got to come out the back and turn into a product and get back on the shelves. We just have not thought about this enough, you know, and we all want to do it. We all want to change our consumption habits, we want to change our behaviour habits, and we want to create jobs and investment in Australia. 9.2 jobs for every 10,000 we recycle. Why are we not talking enough about this? Just to give you a comparison, we're kind of middle New South Wales. South Australia says it's getting 80%, but I think that's a bit of a quirk in their legislation with their levies. But hey, we're in New South Wales today, so we won't talk about that. But we're kind of middle of the road. Victoria, much better emphasis and SA on market development, pulling the levers, investing in industry, have grants that support that, the remanufacturing part of the market, that key bit to divert. We're kind of still bumbling along, being regulated. You know what? You can't regulate your way to success. We need to develop markets to be successful in our industry. Our policy settings are quite different. We don't focus to the same level. And this is just a snapshot. This is a great summary that's also in the National Waste Report that compares the jurisdictions. This morning we heard from Rosalie about the level playing field. We all talk about that, but you just cross the state border here and you've got a completely different impact and a completely different way of managing us. So it's really challenging for us as an industry to operate, but it's also really challenging for the rest of the supply chain, the half of the semicircle, to work with us. Because if you go to like a Coles or a Woolies and go, will you do a Love Food, Hate Waste campaign? They go, why would I deal with you on a state level when I'm national? We actually need to step up and start thinking about our industry on a common market across Australia, because that's how we're going to get change. So we're at very different places in the pendulum. We've got very different approaches to industry, but we all love what we do, and thank God we'll never get bored. Then we had last year, people did start to think about us and how we should work with us nationally, and we get the National Waste Policy. So we did spend a lot of time last year actually developing the National Waste Strategy, which got played politics in November with the ministers, which is a bit of a sad thing. But at least we're on the agenda as an industry. So we do actually have now some national targets that we're looking towards. For the first time ever, we've got avoidance as a goal, and we've actually got numerical targets in there about what that looks like. So it's no longer kind of get rid of 10% by, it's actually got a specified amount that we need to reduce by. So we're all thinking differently. Nationally, we're starting to think 80% diversion by 2030. If you think that we're at 62 or 65, depending on the data, that's a really long way to go in 11 years, people. Right? We're not doing that by just putting things across weighbridges. We have to bring it back into circulation. Goals like recycled content. The market is failing us. I don't want to go too much into Michael's panel tomorrow, but, unless we mandate this stuff and set the market settings, it's not going to happen. We know voluntary doesn't work. We've had APCO since the early somethings, 2000s, and it's not happening. We need to actually work out those policy settings we need to change the market and give us the support we need, because we know now the community actually wants it. And as you know, we do everything in according to the hierarchy. We actually want to avoid, recover, reuse, recycle way before we want to go to landfill. Yeah, so that's what we do. That's how we operate. And I really think it should be called the resource management hierarchy, but, join my movement for that. And what's this stuff about circular? Like, we do closed loop, and we do that really, really well. We can take pizza boxes and make them back into pizza boxes. But circular is so much more. It's about regenerative and thinking differently, designing differently. Don't just give it to us and make sure that we can deal with it. Design it in the first place to design out waste and design it for reuse and recycle. So, it's a really exciting time to be in our industry. I can't help but think, the next 18 months are going to be a really good and exciting and fast-paced 18 months. But, I'm sure in a year or two I'll be back here and you'll go, you said, but let's hope I'm right this time. So, Garth, with that context, I'm going to start with you. What are the greatest challenges for industry at present in New South Wales?
That was a pretty large introduction, but trying to keep up, I'll go to rather than the specific detail bits, and there's plenty of those. But I think the overall. Okay, I'll ad-libbing here, but you would have heard me a few years ago. I used to say that our primary problem as a sector was that we were victims of our own success. Everything worked so well that no one cared, no one noticed. Their bins were emptied and gone, and that's why we didn't get the attention we needed. Unfortunately or fortunately, over the last 2 years, that's no longer the case. There's certainly been a public attention on the fact that it's not all working as people thought that it was behind the scenes, that there's certain aspects of it that I think the community at large thought were taking place previously. Everyone in this room probably knew that they weren't in the way that the average punter did. But there's been a real shift in that conversation. I think the part that we still have as that really big challenge is to get away from seeing waste as a lowest cost, how do we deal with this in the cheapest way possible. I think we need to reframe it as to the highest value type equation. That's the fundamental, with all the different issues that come up, whether it's interstate transport, whether it's, sending material to China, it all comes back to the fact that we're trying to do things at the lowest possible cost. And having a different metric and having a different approach and going and being honest with our communities about, this is the value equation. The value equation involves local jobs, it involves local investment, it involves something other than just giving you the lowest headline price.
I forgot. Turn off your phones.
I think that's the fundamental shift that all of us need to be doing, and I think, probably, for the last year at least, at this conference last year, we all knew what was happening in parts of the market. We all knew we were under pressure. It's starting to dribble through to the community. I don't think the community knows what to do with that information. Local government plays a really key role in reframing that. But if we keep trying to do everything at the lowest cost, we're not going to get to that vision that we're talking about. We've got to find a different way to talk about the value that we can create and how do we provide the highest value services to the community that achieve all those objectives.
David, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just building on what Garth was just saying there with the challenges of the industry and the crisis that hit us with the recycling markets across the globe, it created some pretty uncomfortable conversations around our industry about what we do and how we responsibly manage waste. But I think it also created an enormous opportunity for us to actually step up and to create a movement of change and a movement across the country. And certainly in the last 18 months, it's been an exciting time to be involved in some of those discussions around what's happening with waste and what are we doing responsibly about it. But we represent the industry leader panel, but we're only a small portion of the total industry, and we only have a certain amount of capacity to deal with the material that comes to us. So it does require all players and all stakeholders to play a part, and I think Molly was indicating to that, and she highlighted the role of the municipal councils, the local government, state and federal governments also need to play, but I think we also need, and attending some of the education sessions yesterday, the hearts and minds of the people. The expectation of the people upon us as an industry have never been higher, but I think the apathy and the lack of accountability and a lack of interest in changing their behaviours is making it very difficult for us at the back end of the chain to really make effective change and sustainable change. So that first input about our consumer behaviours, our consumer patterns and our packaging choices for material is still having quite a big challenge upon us as an industry.
Yeah, it was interesting when Molly said today, and I hope she's here so I'm not saying anything wrong, about the fact that whether you engage with the manufacturers or the consumers in order to get change around that stuff, and I think Molly's right, it's got to be both, but it can't be voluntary any longer, or it needs to be able to be explained a lot easier about what can and can't go in the bin. It's pretty clear in a contract, there's 7 items, not much that's made of just those 7 items.
And then just to add to that, the other part of the equation for us as an industry is just that back-end markets. We talk about the markets, but we feel the pinch very heavily. So the organics exemption, which was removed, was a big impact on us as a market. Market disappeared overnight. And my experience with the CDS is I'm now collecting a large amount of container bottles. So I got the joy of, I think, about 40% of the bottle containers, glass containers in the States sit in my backyard. So that for me is, and having to do with that market space, we're fortunate in the quality of that glass is of a level that's acceptable some of the processes, but also conscious that has displaced some of the MRF glass that's probably sitting in some of your regional areas as well. So that whole market development and the industry and the use and the reuse of material in other streams. Pleased to see some of the road building and asphalt guys here as well. So that's a different change for our industry, but there is certainly work to do in market development.
Yeah. So Christine, with those challenges in mind, what are the opportunities for industry and Veolia right now?
So I guess feeding on from the theme that David was talking about there in terms of securing markets, I think that really is an opportunity for all of us. Talking about Veolia specifically, we obviously have an interest in trying to find markets and solutions for the waste that we currently manage so that we can actually be more effective in terms of recovering material. And I guess the opportunity is for all of us to work together more effectively, I think, to actually create those markets. We can sit here and say, we need a regulatory framework that's going to provide certainty, which is absolutely part of the issue and what needs to be done. But the onus is also on us collectively to see what we can do and probably collaborate more than we have in the past to try and come up with those answers and actually sort of accept that, you know, we have been living in a global market, and we've seen the impacts of global decisions that are outside of our control. Now's the opportunity for us to take back that control, I suppose, and see what we can do within our own backyard, see what we can do to develop those markets, and work together, whether that's industry, whether that's councils, whether that's government, all together to actually create the future and the solution for the industry.
So Daniel, just on that, for you guys are in not household, but in other areas, what's the greatest opportunity for bingo and the industry right now, do you think?
I think the waste crisis is probably our biggest opportunity. I think, yes, it hit everybody hard on what's going on. I think there's been a lot of good happening in the industry, but it definitely exposed things that I think the country's been quite light on. But I think we now have an opportunity to shape the future of the waste industry. And at Bingo, I think we've been doing that for the last few years. And right now, you know, we're going to spend $200 million building some ecology parks, and we believe we're going to go a long way in solving part of the problem in New South Wales. What we're trying to do right now is we separate a lot of materials or waste into separate products. About 6 of them we turn into an actual product for the end market. The other few we actually separate, but unfortunately we have to landfill them because we don't actually have the end market. And 2 ways we think we need to do that is we need government support. We need mandated use of recycled products in large infrastructure projects. That alone will solve a lot of the problem we're having. And we're actually working with industry. We're actually working with, you know, plastic manufacturers, timber manufacturers, and we think we're moving forward in that aspect. However, the regulators sometimes put their barriers are too high to climb. So I think governments and regulators need to drop those barriers to make it easier for companies to work with the market, the end market, to create products, because there's a willingness to do that right now. So I think in the past, Australians, we haven't, as the industry, we haven't invested enough into waste infrastructure assets. We've been landfill rich. I think those days are now over. I don't think there's a big tolerance for landfills in the country anymore. There's definitely a tolerance for recycling. However, I think in the next few years, there's a big investment needed in recycling infrastructure to catch up. And we've got that opportunity. Those willing to invest, I think, can seize on the opportunity. However, we need government support. We need community support. I think education is going to be a big part of this process. If the community aren't educated, there's no buy-in. We've seen that with waste to energy in New South Wales. Community need education. We all need education on what's happening. What are the benefits for this? And one of the biggest things is jobs creation. So every time we build a recycling plant, we employ between 40 and 50 people to run a recycling plant. On average, does about 250,000 tonne a year. And we divert over 80% of that material from landfill. So we're creating jobs and also contributing to a circular economy. So I think the waste crisis is our biggest opportunity right now.
So Tony, 2 themes that keep coming through is creating value and creating markets. Yeah. So as an outsider and now one of us, what have you seen as the barriers to doing that since you've joined us, and what do you see as the things that could facilitate that?
Thank you for accepting me so quickly.
Yeah. Well, not yet. Yeah, I've got to. You're here, but you know.
Look, in my experience, I think there's 4 or 5 categories, but most people want action. Waste crisis, I want action. And you go to boardrooms and I get, after 75 days, we need an action plan. I'm hearing we need action. But think about this. Before action, there has to be understanding. Before understanding, there has to be awareness. And before awareness, which my 10-year-old daughter struggles with, there has to be attention. Have you been in a boardroom where we're talking about a crisis and someone's on their phone, distracted, and they're off, and it's a critical point where their little point of view or big point of view could have made a big difference to shaping a future strategy and an action plan? So if you start thinking that way and start redefining the value, Daniel was right. At the moment, Suez in particular, and most of our industry, at the front end we work on a pull system. I come and collect bins and I pull waste streams. But then I get to my process and treatment facilities and I do what I can. But on the other end, it's a push. I push it to landfill, or I push it into a container to China, which is apparently no longer available. If we really want to change it, we need a pull system all the way through, which means our roads people, our manufacturers, our IKEAs, all these other companies need to pull those value products through, back right into the design. I spent 12 years as an engineer designer and know what it takes to actually reinvent something, but it's costly to change it to a recycled product. We don't think that. It's not even part of the thought. Today it is, or companies are starting to change. So last week, Qantas did the first flight zero waste from Sydney to Adelaide. Everything on that vessel, the containers, everything that was used was taken off that plane and processed and brought back into products and or organics. But that's taken somebody like the Qantas CEO to really pay attention, be aware of it, decide that he's going to do something about it, and then make the industry work towards it. Until those fundamental changes are there, which is back to today, I feel the attention is still not there. We are talking about it. The EPA is aware of it. But our government and some of the big industry players in Australia are not paying attention. We have not got their attention yet.
So Garth, how do we get their attention? You have to hand it back to him.
I think the media plays a big role, and I think that we've had, not that it's been fun, not that it's been pleasant, but I think we've had success in terms of getting some of these issues into a public conversation. So it's not just 600 people who come to the COFS conference who are talking about it. I think that there has been I think that we need, as Tony said, that awareness at the front end. I think that that's happening. How do we create that change? I think that we have to have sensible policies. I think that we have to have. When I come back to that collaboration, I think that's a really important theme. Like, we all sitting here compete with each other at different times, but I think that there needs to be a collaborative approach, and not just us five, but the whole room. We've all got the same problems. We're all trying to do the same thing for the community, fundamentally. But then we go and enter contracts with each other that have us at opposition, where we're not aligned, we're not all rowing in the same direction. We've got fundamental barriers between us all trying to collaborate and work effectively together. So I think that being more sensible about that and trying to recognise that we are all here trying to achieve the same thing. We might have slightly different efforts. We're all still going to compete with each other, to win business. But I think that we have to be more collaborative, and particularly from my perspective, I guess it's in those local government contracts. We're never going to get there if we've got contracts that say that all the risk is on moving the product is with one party at a fixed price for a long term. That's not a way to get to a sustainable outcome. We've got to be able to take a sensible approach and say, okay, well, we're all in this together. This is what we do. This is what you do. This is where neither of us can control it, but we've got to be able to share that more intelligently than we have in the past. So I think focusing on alignment and trying to get real partnerships happening, I think, is a big part of the problem. If we keep at loggerheads with each other, then we can't bring the rest of the community along with us.
Currently, we're at 62% diversion, or 65 day. At least by 2021, we've got to get to 70%, and by 2030, 80%. What are the biggest challenges, or what do we need as an industry to actually get that diversion happening? Focus on policy and reg, if you can, regulation. Was that not a fair question? Should I give that one to Tony? Because he seems to talk pretty well.
I think we've mentioned a few other things before. So it's an integrated approach to the whole market stream or the industry stream. So it's not just something that these chairs we can facilitate some of those diversion rates, but we absolutely have to manage those inputs into that process to enable that recognition of value and recognition of market space at the back end. I think the other space we need to work at very well is around our data and information gathering. There is a lot of disparate information or conflicting information in the market space, and I don't think we as an industry market ourselves very well. I don't think it's a very sexy industry to be in if you're not in this room. It's very difficult to get good, reliable information and good, reliable facts. And it's interesting when you start adding up the number of people who are employed across your business. But not only if I've got a truck at Moree, I'm employing hydraulic fitters, mechanics, I'm employing fuel suppliers out there, and industry. So as a regional provider of employment across our sector, we make an enormous impact across the state, both in the metro and the city areas. I think we absolutely have to be proud of our achievements, and I think there is an appetite for investment. There's been a couple of hundreds of $1 million of investment across these sector in recent years. Some large infrastructure places. So there's an appetite to invest in infrastructure. We just need to create the market both ends for it.
Christine, do you think there's a role for energy for waste in all these conversations?
I do think there is a role for it to play. I mean, we see that globally. It is part of our hierarchy at the moment. We don't have any, here at the moment, but it's recognised as being, an element of that. I think the challenge is what role does it play, and to what extent. That's what we sort of need to figure out at the moment. I think the discussions this morning around the EU were an interesting one, and I think I'd probably point out that they have a mature energy from waste market existing there at the moment. So the questions that they have and the challenges they have are probably different to what we have, where we haven't launched into that yet, in our part of the world. So that the question is, what role does it play when you're talking about these longer term strategies and where we're trying to head? It moves things up the chain from disposal or from landfill at the moment in terms of our hierarchy. But what does that look like into the future? And that's where I think some of that data is really important for us to look at. Where are we heading? What are we trying to do? And what are we trying to achieve? So if there's a role to be played in terms of energy from waste, what does that look like? And it's only part of the solution. I think the focus needs to be on, if we're looking at energy recovery, it's recovering the material that is non-recyclable. So it's not taking away from any other initiatives, whether that's waste avoidance, whether that's recycling, and all the other great things that we're trying to do collectively as an industry to increase our recovery across the board. It's basically saying, for those waste streams that are too problematic for us to deal with at the moment, what can we do with those to actually add value along the way?
So,
So just in terms of advertising the industry and the energy from waste conversation, and I pick up on Molly's point that we haven't put any facilities out there for energy from waste, but Earth Power is a facility that Veolia and ourselves have a joint venture. We take in 50,000 tonnes of organic waste and we use anaerobic digestion. We actually export energy to the grid as a result of that. So tick for energy from waste. Resource Code developed in Western Sydney. That was actually built under the waste to energy policy guidelines. It wasn't easy, but it got up and we are meeting the hurdles. Critical to that, we had to treat it like a manufacturing operation. It wasn't a recycling facility. We had to specify the inputs and specify the outputs and secure the end market. So we've got a partnership with Boral in Berrima. So the material goes down to the cement kilns down there. Another energy from waste. A couple of panel members and myself, we have landfills. We capture landfill gas from landfills. So 130 million kilowatt hours of renewable energy is generated from landfills in the Cleanaway team, and similar numbers across Veolia and Suez. So there is energy from waste. We are doing something in that space. I think the other question is about where the next phase of energy from waste is coming from, and I think that's the next big conversation around energy from waste.
I don't think there's a lot of confusion. Everyone assumes energy from waste is just pure thermal and incineration. It comes in many shapes, sizes and forms. First fact sheet coming out of WAMA soon on the thermal, but everyone just assumes it's about burning it. It's more complex than that. We've got over 30 nationally of different shapes and forms, and it's part of the hierarchy to get those resources and use it. Daniel, we've got a new minister in New South Wales, hopefully soon federally. Oops. What would you like him... Sorry, did I say that? Oh, sorry. Anyway, I did meet Melissa, but she told me she wasn't going to be there for very long, so she couldn't help me, which was really sad because she was still minister. So anyway, Daniel, you've got a new minister in New South Wales. What would you, if you were to meet him, what would you ask him to make the priorities of for our industry now? Like, what actions would you like him to take?
I think all of the above, everything we've discussed today, I'd like to talk to him about and get him focused on. But if I could pick one thing, I guess approve an energy from waste facility in Sydney. I think, if we want to achieve your diversion rates that you spoke about before, energy from waste definitely plays a part. We're not going to achieve it without it. If we want to stop sending waste, rubbish, mixed waste to landfill, energy from waste is the only solution to capture all the non-recyclables that we can't actually recover and turn into a product. So then landfills should only be used for soils, asbestos, contaminated material. Everything else that's combustible eventually should not go into a landfill. Another thing I think is have a policy or an outlook for Australian waste precincts. We need big waste precincts in the country. I'm probably a bit biased because we own two big ones in Western Sydney, 82 hectares of land at Eastern Creek and 60 hectares of land at Orchard Hills, where We want to create waste precincts, and we want to basically accept all waste types in the one facility, separate all waste types in the one facility, create as many products in the one facility, have an integrated asset to stop trucks moving all over Sydney, to actually create those operational and transport efficiencies, which makes it actually economically viable to actually process these products. So they're probably the two things I'd want from him.
Tony, Suez operates globally and in the EU and here. What circular economy lessons do you think Suez could bring to Australia to get us going?
I think, look, the circular economy is a great term. If you go back 30 years ago, it was the commodities economy, where we mined and we sold product. 30 years on, we're still mining and selling product. And we are, I suppose, circular economy. We're just at the beginning of it, in my opinion. Where can we take it? Well, let's break it up into, I suppose, 5 categories for me. First thing, if we really, really want circular economy, if I was sitting there with Matt and having that chat, I'd say, what is our policy and strategy? And I'd ask him that because I don't think they are clear today. And fundamentally, how long will it take to approve that policy and strategy? In my opinion and experience, I worked for a lot of defence departments as a subcontractor, a client, and one thing I found, the biggest issue is queue delay. Approval to make a decision. And so if we can agree what the plan and strategy is, agree what the policy is for circular economy, and one thing I'd do, and that would be to change the definition of diversion. I think we are halfway there. Diversion from landfill, I'm hearing it for 75 days. That's half the solution. We should introduce a new term, inclusion in manufacture. Everything from roads to IKEA plastic to whatever you do, you must include a percentage of recycled product. And if you do that, the government will either subsidise you, help you, but you watch the economy grow that way. When it's a pull system, everything will work. Because at the moment we are regulated and regulated and regulated, and I think one of my colleagues said, if we are regulated, we cannot innovate. We cannot innovate. We are limited to the capacity of where it is. Energy from waste is one of the policies we've talked about. It, to me, is a fundamental step. It's like turning 30 to 40 years of age. In those next 10 years, you must go through every number. You cannot just go through. If we're going to become circular, we've got to bring in all these technologies which will help us extract that value. At Suez, we are trying to redefine what value is, and I use this as an example. If I take a piece of metal, still, all of us can buy it for $5, a bullion of metal. If we do a little bit of processing, we can make horseshoes and make $12 out of that. $5, $12, increase the value, plus the cost of processing it. If I do a bit more processing, I can make hose fittings. I can make $30. If I do a bit more processing, I can make golf sticks, $1,000. If I go it all the way to the end and make watch parts, out of that same $5, I can make $330,000. Then we have an economy. Metal is one of the products that we recycle. Each of those various waste streams, if we think about how we redefine value and get off-takers who have an inclusion target in every tender they submit to government, then we can start to change the way our circular economy works. It'll pull. We won't be able to feed enough products to the economy.
I look forward to that day. By the way, Tony used to be a farmer. That was his first job. So there you go, the horseshoe analogy, well done. Garth, what's standing in our way of going circular? Like, you've got the perspective of the journalist, the consultant, and now the operator and all the bins. You know, we all want to get there. We all do want to row in the same direction. What's stopping us? What are the challenges? And what are the solutions?
So I've been talking all those big airy-fairy things. I'll go back to some specific barriers in New South Wales, but you know, as a company that's you know, primarily here to build new resource recovery infrastructure, some of the real barriers to us doing that and, you know, achieving the circular economy vision, one, there's got to be, you know, an economy of scale. We've got to get control of enough feedstock to warrant doing anything. The other really massive issue in New South Wales compared to other jurisdictions is the approvals process. So for me, looking to go and win a tender for enough material to go and build something innovative and smart, I've got to go and enter a tender that says, this is how much I'm going to charge you for it. When's the facility going to be available? In New South Wales, I've got to say, well, possibly within 18 months, but it might be 2.5 years. I'm not quite sure. Don't know how that aligns with your timeframes. The uncertainty and the time that it takes to approve anything in New South Wales is just an absolute handbrake on doing anything new. If you want to build new infrastructure, you've got to have a certainty to do it. I compare that to Queensland, where if I'm proposing the same facility at the same standards, at least I'm confident that within 6 months someone will have ticked the box and said, yes, you can go and do that. I've got certainty when I enter a tender. It is really, really hard in New South Wales. I've got so many others that I could keep going on with.
It's all right. Do 2 more, and then I'll share 2 more.
Yeah, look, that for me is a really difficult one. Is aggregating enough material. So we talk to some innovative people who want to do something, but they haven't coordinated with anyone else. It's impossible to do it yourself. Some of the regional planning, that conversation this morning about not just having a statewide goal, but having sub-regional plans. In theory, I think it always works well. In practice, I've been involved in some really bloody painful processes where it's hard enough to get one council to do, one set of councillors to do the same thing at the same time. Trying to get 3 sets of councillors to do the same thing at the same time is really, really difficult. Again, made less difficult if we actually aligned a strategic vision and a plan. If we had an infrastructure strategy and everyone agreed these are the things that we need, that would make it a little bit easier to get there. But we don't have that plan. I'm a little bit worried about that 20-year vision, which is good, but I'm trying to not become a cynical, miserable old man before my time. I know I'm going to get there and join you, Ron, but
He's only 40 this year. I think
I'm
it's this
fighting
year,
it as long as I can. But
40 this year.
But when I look at some of the things that happened in New South Wales last year with the banning of a process that had been supported and encouraged, people had invested in, I look at those sort of uncertainties and I go, how do we do this? We talk about this beautiful circular economy vision. How do we actually build the nuts and bolts infrastructure when I've got to go and convince a bank that no one is going to walk in tomorrow and decide, no, this is no longer aligned with our vision, we're going to turn that off? Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. That question about what would I do with the minister, if I was the minister for the day, I would stand up and apologise for the process.
Can't do that one yet.
Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. But, there needs to be a serious relook at that, and there needs to be a serious commitment that once we set a direction, once we agree we're going to do something, we're going to work together and we're going to support it, and we're not going to chop and change things around the place. Yes, we can always get better, but going backwards and in that sort of process, it's a real handbrake. So we can have all these aspirations of what we want to get, but you've got to build stuff, nuts and bolts on the ground. To do that, you've got to get approval. To do that, you've got to have shareholders or funders support, and the practical barriers to that include actual regulatory certainty, policy certainty, what's happening in the long term.
I think one of the biggest challenges to going circular is the paradigm is when does waste become a resource, right? And actually seeing it as a resource. The precautionary principle, has it gone too far in New South Wales? Like, I guess I'm throwing that out. Like our whole diversion system, resource recovery, orders and exemptions, MWE just goes overnight. Have we gone too far? Have we lost our mind in some ways?
I think that we need to be more careful with these things. These things have, they have serious long-term implications, and I think that we can't make rushed and ill-informed decisions. I think that there has to be, if the answer is that some part of the market is no longer achieving what we want to achieve, that's fine. But there's got to be a sensible transition to something better. It can't just be it's easy to say no to things. It's really easy to say no. Don't like that, no, don't like that. But you've got to frame that in the overall context of, well, what's the alternative? If you're looking at one specific item and saying, okay, is there a risk attached to that? Yes, there is, but you've got to weigh that across everything. It's like, I keep using the analogy of cars. If you went and did an impact, is there a risk of driving a vehicle, and that was all you looked at, you'd get the report back and you'd have a long list of risks, and you go, well, let's not drive cars. But when you weigh that up, in the context of, okay, these are our alternatives, something's got to happen, we're not all going to stay in one place all the time. And having a sensible, transparent process, I think, is really, really important, and not having that regulatory uncertainty.
So, Dave, if you got to be Minister for the day, since Garth got to be, what would you do?
I think I'd search, or I'd seek ways to gain greater cooperation and coordination. Just picking up on Garth saying about not doing it alone, I think that's an important piece to have. Regulatory certainty, that's key as well, so making sure that happens. But I think it's the coordination piece. I think it's about setting a framework that we could coordinate and innovate and bring to the table some innovative solutions to waste challenges. But the other thing I would absolutely do is do a mandatory buyback for local and state government for product and materials.
How do we innovate, Christine, currently, or don't we?
I think we need to innovate. I think that is a really key part of it, and not wanting to harp on it too much in terms of what's been already discussed, but in order to innovate, we need to be given the levers and the ability to do that. So sort of, building on from what people have been saying in terms of what can be done at a government level, I think we need a framework that actually supports us in that innovation journey, makes it easier to do the right thing, makes it easier to make those changes rather than harder, which I think is what's happening at the moment. We've spoken a little bit about MWU and the challenges there. It sort of seems like if we want to do something different, if we want to move up the hierarchy, it's harder than continuing to do the same thing. So I think we need a framework that actually supports that enables us to innovate. I mean, we have global expertise, we have technologies that are being implemented over in Europe. We're looking at how we're recycling plastics, how we're actually turning that back into a product and actually creating those markets. That's actually happening in other parts of the world. We can bring that to Australia. We can make that happen here. We just need to be supported in that, and I think that's what everyone's looking for. That support, that framework that enables us to do what we do best as an industry, which is actually implement those solutions that we have and work together to improve things.
Okay, so I think I've asked enough questions. Is there anyone want to take from the floor? Yep, at the back. Just wait for the microphone, please. Oh, Kat, did you get to come from Adelaide?
Yes, all the way from Adelaide. Thanks for having me, and great panel discussion. There's been a lot of discussion on landfill diversion, and as one of the speakers noted, we need to move away from this measure. So my question's about new measures for the circular economy, and I'm curious to hear from the panel on what measures would you like to see for the circular economy to be included in strategies for government so we can actually start focusing our efforts towards them.
Who's got the talking stick? Garth.
I'm just going to go back to what Dave said a minute ago, but mandated recycled content in products. If I had to pick one measure, that's the one that I'd want. It's not about diversion, it's about are we actually creating markets and using it across a bevy of things, whether it's roads, whether it's drink containers. But I think that mandating and setting that, once that starts, once there's a minimum requirement and there has to be something there, and have people battle it out. The minimum standard's 20, but I've done 30. Fantastic, but there's got to be a start, and I think you've got to do that by mandating recycled content.
It's the thing in Europe that Rosalind talked about this morning, and we saw it last year. We still do a race to the bottom, the cheapest across the border, and in Europe they're actually a race to the top. They're competing amongst themselves, just like I've got the most recycled content. Like, how do we do that paradigm shift where we create the value and recognise it costs, but we're actually doing awesome things like creating jobs and keeping resources circulating? That paradigm shift is so key to our success. Is there a hand or scratching? Oh, yep. Ronnie? Kat, you don't get two. Oh, okay, all right. Someone else. Yeah, oh. All right. Dave?
Look, I think the key one is, as Garth said, and I think we're not at the level of sophistication to really get some really clever measures around our industry just yet. Probably one for New South Wales is a reduction of levy pay to the state government. So that would be an indication that we're not going to landfill. So maybe that's a back-end measure. But it's the diversion piece for me, I think.
Anyone else?
maybe just taking a slightly different tack from a circular economy point of view, if we actually start looking at the products that we're producing and what is recyclable in those products, you know, if you start looking at it from the other end of the spectrum, rather than having a waste that is a problem, how do we turn that around and say, well, if we have a problem waste, where's it coming from? Why are we producing that in the first place? Do we need to? Are there alternatives? And looking at it from that perspective, then that might create new opportunities for all of us that mean that we have less of a problem when it comes to our waste.
Dan, you want to add? I think it's all we mentioned. Are you happy now, Kat? Is that enough? 3? Okay, cool. All right, moving on. Next. Oh, yep. Someone down here. No, you're not. Oh, God, Jimmy, it's not always about you, you know. All right, over here.
G'day, Alan Hazelin, Hillshire Council. A couple of years ago, there was a Four Corners expose on a glass bottle mountain. And then in the last year or so, we've been addressing the China national sword policy. So I think most people in the room would be curious to know what happened to the glass bottle stockpile, what's currently happening with glass bottles, which we continue to use, and what's this current situation with plastics now? Given that following China, there was, I think, Malaysia and more recently Indonesia have turned it down. I'm just curious to know what is happening currently with all this stuff. Thank you.
Glass, Garth, as a MRF operator, do you want to talk, Dave? What do you want to do?
So the market still exists in Australia for glass and for plastic. So there's some domestic sources onshore. So glass, obviously, with OI in Queensland and New South Wales, and then South Australia and Aurora down there. So material is still being sent to those facilities, and I can speak from the Container Deposit Scheme in New South Wales, as that's where the glass is heading to. The other challenge with, and we see it starting to emerge, is glass into sub-base and road base base layers, and we changes only recently to move that from 2.5% to 10% content will be very positive in that market space. So that's a great step forward. So it is being recycled, the glass, but the challenge is just the volume of glass which we produce in Australia is a little bit more than what the market can manage, and it's about preparing in a manufacturing specification. So you get the glass and you reprocess it, and you end up with a percentage of fines, and that needs to be managed as well. So the glass is being managed, but it is difficult, and I acknowledge it's very difficult for some of our regional councils, and I've been talking with some of those in recent days on how we bring more of that material into the CDS stream. In terms of plastics, again, there's some great solutions. There's a company up near Narrabri, funnily enough, who's doing some really nice work in plastic reprocessing. And then on top of that, we've got Visy in Sydney who are taking plastics out of the containers stream. But there's certainly continual challenges. Some of the export markets are still available, and that's still open, providing you treat the material as a resource and you treat it as a manufacturing input, and you clean it up and you make sure the contamination is in order. If you do that, then you're producing a manufacturing input product, and you can get markets and you can get that sale on the water.
So just on the glass, so we just spoke about mandated use of recycled products. So if the government mandated the use of glass in recycled road bases, then we can basically solve the glass problem in this country from government procurement on infrastructure projects. Like, it is that simple. The glass problem disappears out of this country tomorrow with the amount of roads that we need to build over the next 50 years in this country.
The frustration I have is that, exactly as Daniel said, reactions after that conversation on trashed. I was involved in some of those high-level, multi-stakeholder meetings where you've got, people from the Environment Department and Roads Department, and the answer is as clear as day. It could not be simpler. We are using a heap of sand. We have a heap of glass that we can convert to sand. It is a really, really obvious answer. And again, if we're talking about more complex parts of the circular economy, if we can't bloody well get glass right, what are we're kidding ourselves. Like, it is absolutely ridiculous that we have, and I'll come back to government departments, but you've got government departments that one arm of government will send it to a facility, the other arm of government will be using sand, the facility will be making glass sand, but the government won't take it. It's absolutely insane stuff. And you see it works in places like Lismore have been a great example where, a council's running its own facility obviously it makes sense. You are making one product over here, you need the product over there. What a great idea. But the fact that that isn't translating and isn't happening en masse is just absolutely horrific. If that took up the bulk demand so that we don't have stockpiles of material, then we can all innovate and we can go and look at glass benchtops and stuff that's higher value in the glass. But we've got to have that bulk safety net. Here's the demand, and that's a really clear example where it makes sense. Just quick comment on the plastic. Sorry.
I couldn't agree more. It's been, 18 months, and everyone knows the solution. It's not like we're all sitting here giving you new answers to all the problems. To be honest, I think we all know what the answers are. It's just no one's doing anything about it. I think you started off with that today. We've just got to now do something about it. I think that's the biggest frustration. Like Bingo, we don't operate in glass. I don't want to touch the glass right now because there's an issue with glass. But if the mandated use came out, guess what? Bingo's operating in glass tomorrow. There's now a market. There's more competition. There's more people. There's more infrastructure able to support glass, for an example. But right now, we don't want to operate in it because it's a loss-making exercise and it's an issue. Until we can solve that issue with an end market, we stay out of the industry.
Garth, you want plastics?
Just on the plastics, I agree with Dave. There are good domestic markets for the high value part of the plastic stream. So if you're able to separate out your PET and container deposit schemes is a fantastic way to do that. You can do it at a MRF as well. So PET, HDPE, not a massive drama. Everything else, the mixed plastic, is a real problem. It's the area that, to Christine's point before, but it's everything else that's left when you strip out the stuff that has an obvious, domestic market. That mixed plastic, a big part of that answer is find out why is that crap in the bin in the first place. Why are we letting it into the market if we don't have an intelligent use for it at the back end? It is it's only 2% of what's coming into our recycling facilities if you're stripping out the good stuff, but 2% times 18 months of inaction equals a pretty large stockpile that gets pretty hard to manage. There are problems here that can't just be solved at the end of the pipe. They've got to be intelligently looked at up the stream.
And I don't know if anyone's also a nerd, but if you read The New Plastics Economy by Ellen MacArthur, came out 2015, it actually says globally the only thing of value is PET and HDPE. So why are we even making the rest? So with your avoidance drive, people stop buying stuff that's not in PET or HDPE, because I'm sure that'll change the message pretty quickly that we don't want it. Yeah, and that's what we have to start doing. Ronnie, you're very keen.
I am. So just based on my personal experience, in 2015, we got our government to commit to halving food waste. This is before UN SDG. They did nothing about it. We created a Zero Food Waste Forum, and in 2016, the government committed again, and now there's a national strategy. Sitting on this stage are the most powerful people in waste. Your 5 businesses are extraordinary. Why are you waiting for government? Sorry, but the 5 of you could collaborate and make change. You've just said you could make change. You could be grinding sand out of glass and building roads. I know we need permission for lots of things, but we can also ask forgiveness.
I just got to say though, Ronnie, it's one thing to ask forgiveness for robbing the bank. Like someone's got to pay for it, and it's one thing to ask forgiveness for doing stuff, but there's got to be money there to do it. I don't know how you do that without doing something really asking forgiveness.
It's been pretty public, but we've done that a few times. So and I don't think I'm prepared to do it again now that we're public, but I guess we've invested a lot of money into waste infrastructure on the back of no government procurement, and we've taken a punt. I don't think every company will take a punt. To set up waste infrastructure costs a lot of money. You're talking tens and tens of millions of dollars, and I guess with the governance in place and the return hurdles that companies like ours need, sometimes it's hard to take those punts moving forward. But we've definitely done that. We've definitely tested and asked for forgiveness, and we're still paying for those sins now. But sometimes you have to do it. But I guess moving forward, the bigger you get, you just can't operate that way.
Oh, Darren, you need a microphone.
Garth, in your mind, what's the reluctance, if it's so clear and obvious to everyone here with the glass solution, Is it engineers lost faith in the past using recycled content? Is it what is it? What's the reluctance? Is it engineer level? Is it policy level? What is it?
Yeah, I think that there is a chicken and egg situation. Glass is probably a good example to think about with other materials as well. I think the chicken and egg is that there has to be an agreement that it will have a market at an agreed specification. I think that what's probably happened is that there have been attempts, until you've got that agreement that you're going to take it, how are you going to invest in making a high quality product? If you aren't making a high quality product and you're trying to get that into market because you're just trying to do the best you can and trying to get started, but then people see a low quality product and go, well, hang on, I don't like that, and then that changes their perceptions about it for a long time. So I think there's been a few examples like that. I think that's where glass has been. I think that what we have to do is agree specifications and say, right, if you can make it to this level, we guarantee we'll buy it. And that's what needs to happen across all material types, but glass is an example where industry hasn't done itself favours in the past in some examples, I think.
I think one thing we also need is, if I could be the minister again for a day, I'd double the resources in the EPA department and government departments, because I really believe they're under-resourced. There's definitely some talented people in these organisations which are willing to help. They're just overworked. And by the time they talk to us, it's today. Then when they talk to us again, it's 2 or 3 months later. It's not because they don't want to talk to us and they don't want to help sometimes. It's just because they're inundated with work. So that is also really stopping progress in our industry. So we need more resources. I think the government needs to see that this is now an economy in itself. There's a waste economy. It contributes to the economy. It makes money. It employs people. Give us the resources we need to move forward.
Saying good things about the EPA won't get you off those sims, though. Just saying. Hashtag.
Thought that would help.
All right, Ron? Oh, yeah, sorry. Ron, sorry. Did you have it? Sorry, you're next. Sorry.
Cynical old man asking a question, Garth. Thinking outside the 9 dots, there is another solution for glass. The problem is we don't make bottles in Australia as much as we used to. Has anyone thought about slapping an import duty on imported glass? This is sort of what China is doing to us, using environmental considerations, not us only, the rest of the world, to restrict their imports. Is it possible to develop a case in Australia for restricting the amount of glass that we import and make the bottles ourselves?
Agreed. Yeah. All right.
Hi, hello. It's me again.
Oh, you again.
So back from glass to plastics. I just wanted to ask the industry if there is indeed, we heard the buzzword about the Chinese wall, but there is a new buzzword as of Friday, which is the Basel ban, because in Basel, a restriction on the transboundary movement of plastic waste was agreed. And I was just wondering how the Australian industry prepares for this. In Europe, we have indeed, we have started already preparing. We have a recycled content target on plastic, and the industry is preparing to recycle the non-recyclable fraction, including through chemical recycling and some other innovations. But I was just wondering, how do you see this development, which is as of last Friday, actually, the Basel Agreement on this restriction? Thank you.
Who'd like to go with that? Yeah. Basil bang, just when we thought it couldn't get better.
Yeah, look, and I don't see it as fundamentally different to the other international bans that we've been looking at. What do? We need to develop local remanufacturing capability. The problem is that we've been saying that for 18 months, and sorry, I will say that there are some developments in the pipeline that just haven't spat out yet. But again, in New South Wales, when you're talking about 2 years from when you have a great idea and you've worked out exactly what you're going to do to when you can actually do it, that's the problem. And the reality is that some of this material is either going to have to go into a long-term stockpile. Good luck with that, given the propensity to burn things down, or it's going to end up going to landfill until we get our house in order and have a domestic remanufacturing. The frustration you're probably hearing here is that we know, and Europe provides such an example in so many fronts, but we sit here and we go, yeah, that's what we should be doing. we should. Yeah, we should. And we just haven't actually done it yet. And that's the bit that's taxing over time.
Could I add to that? So the Basel Agreement, if you're not aware, is obviously a policy international. In defence, in my last experience, they introduced it for the decommissioning of large naval vessels. So the government took a policy stance that we will not send our big assets that are no longer used overseas to India so they could beach them using unsafe practices and pollute the environment. So they took a position in Australia. As a result, they had to tender the decommissioning of a wasted asset, and companies in Australia tendered, and that asset was shipped from Sydney across to WA, where it was crunched up and all that steel was reprocessed, and then it was sent back to Adelaide to manufacture the next generation of vessels. What we're saying is those kind of policies internationally allow us as Australia to be great again as using those buzzwords, but we need to manufacture more product, or at least process it to a point where we can create an export market. Someone mentioned, well, let's put tariffs on the imports and ensure our products are going off and they're coming back using 30% inclusion of our wasted products. That's the kind of policy statements. I wish I could make that position. As Ronnie said, we can get in and collaborate. Absolutely. We need those, I suppose, principles agreed. We as industry players have been more than willing to collaborate, innovate and develop. But without that, we are looking at only the monetary position of every business case. But what I'm seeking is what is the meaning behind what we're doing. If we focus on the meaning, a bit what Ronnie's example is, we're nourishing Australia. That's a meaning. Money does not become a conversation. You'll find it. But we don't have that clear meaning around that circular economy. It is still debated. We haven't got the attention, like I said before, of the right people at a national level, at a state level, at a local level. A lot of members here are local. There are a lot of my customers, our customers. They have a voice. They want to also influence this. How do we work on that framework?
Oh, some questions over there. Probably time for two. How many hands are up there? Okay, those last three. Okay.
Hi, Celine Okuri from SLR Consulting. In a linear economy, manufacturers make their money by creating products that we are encouraged to dispose of so that we can buy products again. And I know in Europe there is a growing movement called the right to repair, where manufacturers are encouraged to create products where us consumers are able to repair them and continue the value of that product. So my question is, how can we influence manufacturers at the start of the circular economy, when their incentive is to create products that are disposed of, to be able to create products that help us in the waste sector to disassemble their products and be able to continue the value within each material of that product?
It's not past the
It's been left with me, yeah. I guess maybe taking a slightly broader response to that question, we're all part of the community, we all have a say, so it doesn't need to be the industry sitting here making a difference. We can all actually stand up, individually and say we want to change. It's probably a slightly different answer to the industry sort of perspective, but we can all make a difference. We are the community, we can drive for change as well. So if that's something that collectively we're trying to achieve, then let's do it.
I think with that question, it's more about how do we ensure those products remain in the system before they become disassociated. We all have phones. My daughters have phones. We have this kind of social connection and emotional connection when we buy products. And the Australians want to own it. We want to own our car, we want to own our home. It's a big Aussie dream. We want to own it. But then with that means that you form a relationship, and after a certain period that iPhone is no longer of use to you, and your emotional connection detach it and it becomes waste. And then nobody owns it, and therefore, guess what? I end up picking up that phone in a landfill that might ignite and create a fire and burn down one of my facilities, for example. What we need to do is to seek those kind of phone companies for them to own that asset. So if we want to, we just subscribe, a bit like Netflix. Who has Netflix here? You pay your $10 a month and you just get a service. If we go into that means the circular economy is dead, and now it's a shared economy where you don't own anything. It's the companies who manufacture own it, and you just pay a subscription fee. But that's then back to a social debate. We all want to own things, so we need to change the pull for it as communities, not to own a phone. And therefore, iPhone will own all the phones in the world, and they will deconstruct what they construct and reuse a portion of it. That's a long way away, in my opinion.
Yeah, agree. Another question? There's two who had their hand up. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Sarah Jane Widdowson from Ricardo. Slightly different subject area, but I wanted to understand what top tips the panellists have for council to get better value from their contracts. So what would you like to see specifically in council contract specifications?
Okay. Look, I think we've spoken about it before, and collaboration's been a key. And I think early engagement in the contract formulation, because what we're seeing nowadays, part of the answer to some of the crisis around recycling in the waste industry is to just create tougher and harder contracts to meet the obligations in it. And specifically, seeing some contracts come out that mandate you must use a certain size and dimension of truck in a certain area. And for an industry who may be looking to innovate or bring some new ideas, it doesn't really create a lot of value to it. And when you create a fairly rigid framework around the contract environment without consultation with the industry or understanding where the industry is moving, it does mean that the industry places a lot of risk into that contract, and therefore there's a premium to be paid in that tender process. So I think in terms of tips for councils, talk to the industry, engage with your current contractor and engage with potential contractors. Bring them in. You're making decisions about sometimes $20, $30 million contracts per year in the council environment, which probably for most councils it's the largest contract they'll be doing during a 7-year cycle. And to do that in isolation with what the industry is doing there's better ways to do it. So engage with the industry. I don't think you're going to get a no from a contractor if you ask him, can you come and talk to us about what's happening in the industry, whether it's your own contractor or prospective ones.
A couple of things from me. I think local council should not focus on price. So what extra added value can the operator or the waste company provide? Every time we race to the bottom, you're not going to get value out of us all the time if we're racing to the bottom. A second thing is when you give a contract away, I think you should demand or put in a contract a certain recovery rate. Know how much waste is getting recovered, but don't just ask for it. I think you should get it audited. Right? A lot of companies out there say that they're recycling, but they're not recycling. We're one of the only companies in Australia that mandatory audit our waste from an independent third party. So I think that'll help, and also see what they're doing with the waste. So yeah, they're recycling it, they're separating it. What are they doing with the product? Are they creating a product? Go through the chain, the supply chain in a business, and determine that yourselves before you give contracts away.
And offtake agreement too. I think that was pretty clear earlier too, is the help us create the market. So actually buy back, not only know what the supply chain is, but be part of our supply chain, I think.
Can I say, so I think that the structure to have that, I agree with everything that's been said there, but the structure to have that is to have an alignment. That's, if you go through your contract and there's areas where one party's got a completely different incentive to the other party, then you're in strife. Having a recovery target, if that's not linked to a composition spec, then you're in strife. You can't expect an outcome if you're not guaranteeing an input. But I think having an alignment there and having we're all in this together. Having a value sharing approach to the value of that end product, and if the way to increase that value is to buy it back from council internally, or if you can both go and convince your neighbouring partner to do it, but having structures that fundamentally mean the contractor and the council have the same incentives, are trying to do the same thing, and aren't sitting there where they're trying to game each other. That's what needs to happen, in my view.
Hazel, last question.
Thank you, panel. Hazel Story, SS Rock, we've 11 councils in our area. My question is, from the panel, just some advice. We're at one with where you're going, but how do we address the challenge to be able to nimbly respond to external issues, yet by bringing a guaranteed tonnage to get you the investment security, so your finances go, brilliant, there's enough tonnages, we've got guaranteed feedstock. How can we address this long-term contract, yet also be able to be nimble within it so we can both parties respond to externals? I'd just love some insights and tips. Thank you.
Just because I'm holding this, but I'll start with, there are definitely ways to do that, Hazel. A take or pay contract that says, from a contractor's perspective, you're saying, well, I need X dollars of revenue to cover my bank repayments and whatever staff I've got here, and no matter what else happens, we convert that back to a per tonnage basis, but really I've got an annual cost of having a facility available, I've got a cost of having a workforce there, but getting away from a per tonne basis and getting to an availability basis, of a service basis, and per tonne is a measure of how can you do things most cheaply. If you come back to this is the service level that's required, this is what it's going to cost annually, and maybe there's a sliding scale on how many tonnes go through it, but to solve your fundamental problem, I think that's, to me, is a simple and proven way to do that.
And I'd go back to previous comments around the collaboration and the ability to open up a dialogue between the parties at the table. We all experienced the pressure of China Sword, and that changed the dynamics of the recycling contracts that were in place for a number of years. So there was some pretty tough conversations around the table. And it was interesting having across the country insight into some of the different approaches to that. We saw different approaches to different councils around, well, what's the problem, how are we going to do it, and what does it mean? And then creating that into a cost per tenement and understanding what the material impact is, or whether it was a material impact, was also a way to go through it. But it requires a conversation rather than drawing contracts at 10 paces and saying, let's go at it. Both of us need to have those mature conversations and have an outcome in mind for in this case, the ratepayers in the council.
So, thank you. Just one last comment from each of the panel. New federal minister, just say on Monday, you rang them Monday morning, and what would you ask them to do, everyone? Just the last say. Start, Tony.
Establish a federal minister for the waste future and have a task group that brings in both local community, industry, external European and international stakeholders. And if this is a war on waste, then let's have a group to focus within 12 months, develop the next 20-year plan jointly, nationally, not just by state.
National waste levy. Same levy across all states. I think that'll do wonders for the industry.
A national approach is really critical to it. I mean, we all know that we do live in a national economy when it comes to waste. The amount of waste that's going to Queensland at the moment sort of proves that. So to actually take that approach and accept that and see how we can work across all the different jurisdictions.
And I think that word is harmonisation across the country. So we operate in 6 different states, 6 different legislative regimes we work under for operation of our assets, different classifications, the confusion in the market space. So a harmonised one levy, national levy, with a central body coordinating what should be classified as an essential service.
That was 2 things, but technically I'll let you go. Yeah, okay.
I agree with all of those, and the other one that I'd add is mandatory purchase of recycled content, and I'd put the caveat on there that not in 2 years' time after we've gone and reinvented the specifications again, pick up the specs that are out there that work on the materials that are already there. There's plenty that we have to go and make new specs for, but just bloody get on with it. Just mandate that we are going to use this stuff.
Great. All right. If you could all just thank our fantastic panel.